let's go. Now, welcome to this very special event with a very special guest, the one and only Garr Reynolds. Now, I'm super excited about this event. And the reason why that's the case is because you have to know, I don't know if Garr knows this, but you have to know that for me, everything started with Garr. My passion for presentations, public speaking started when I was at university and I read this amazing book, Presentation Zen by Garr Reynolds. And it was the first book that opened my eyes to what it really means to create, design, and deliver effective presentations. It made me understand that a presentation is so much more than just PowerPoint. And when I say PowerPoint, I'm not talking about the presentation tool. I'm talking about the idea that a presentation, if you do it well, if you communicate your ideas well, if you present well, is an opportunity to grow your business, increase your influence and credibility and reputation, advance your career, make a bigger impact. It's an opportunity for you, if you do it well, to make a positive impact in the world. So that's why it's so much more than just putting together some slides. Now, Garr, I think in what he does is definitely one of the best in the world, one of the most talented people I know in the industry. When I think about presentation design in particular, I think of Garr. His approach is very unique because thanks to his life experience living in Japan, he takes the principles and lessons from the Zen arts in Japan and applies them to communication for all of us to be able to communicate better. He's the author of 3 amazing books. If you haven't read them, I know that some of you have, like Jens for sure, for example, but if you haven't read any of Garr's books, I strongly recommend all of them. So you want to read for sure Presentation Zen, then after that Presentation Zen Design, and then also The Naked Presenter. Garr's approach has inspired millions of people all over the world to communicate better. And I'm super excited because I know for a fact that today is going to happen with you as well. Now, before we get started, just a couple of technical things. One is webcam. I see, let me see, many of you, which is great. Some of you, yeah. So you don't have to, but if you feel like it, if you like to turn your webcam on, thank you. That would be great. That would be the best thing we can do to have a good connection with each other. Again, you don't have to, but if you feel like it, feel free to turn it on. The other thing is chat. Everybody is on mute. We do that just to preserve sound quality. But during the event, especially during Garr's presentation, if you have any questions or comments, insights, reflections, anything you'd like to share, by all means, feel free to use the chat and that way we'll make it more interactive. Now, today, Garr is the star of the show. For those of you who don't know me, like many of you, for those of you who don't know Ideas on Stage, just a super quick intro from our side. My name is Andrea. I'm the head of Ideas on Stage UK. I'm a presentation coach. We specialize in working with business owners, leaders, and their teams who want to become more confident presenters. In the last 13 years, we've worked with thousands of clients around the world, including companies like Microsoft, Lacoste, the World Bank, and more than 500 TEDx speakers. Our mission is to stop great ideas from failing just because of the way they are presented. And our vision is to help hundreds of thousands of business leaders share their message so they can grow their business, increase their influence, and make a positive impact in the world. And that's it. Enough about me. I also want to say thank you to our supporting partners. Ron, if you don't mind, could you please include the links to all of our supporting partners? We've got some amazing organizations that you can see in the chart that have decided to support this event, from Aspire to the Visual Jam, Startups Magazine, Impact Hub London. They've recently rebranded to Impact Hub London. Social Enterprise Mark, CIC. At Ideas on Stage, we are big advocates of purpose-driven, impact-driven entrepreneurship and business. Tech Italia, of course, there had to be an Italian element to this event, Hatch Enterprise, and also Everyday People. Check them out, fantastic organizations. If we've got anybody from those organizations, feel free to say hi in the chat. And also stay tuned, because at the end, I'll give you access to a collection of free resources, discounts, interesting things for you to check that our partners have been very kind to offer to all of you. So stay tuned, because at the end, I'll give you access to that. And that's it. In terms of what we are going to do today, Garr is going to talk about Zen and the art of presenting with impact. He's going to speak for about half an hour. As I said, remember, during his presentation, if you have any questions for him, feel free to type your questions in the chat. What I'll do, I'll take your questions, and then after the presentation, I'm going to ask them directly to Garr. So we have a bit of a Q&A, and that's it. And then we'll wrap it up at the end. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Garr Reynolds.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrea. That was a great presentation. That was lovely. So hello to everyone who came out this morning or tonight, wherever you are, and to Phil. I think it was 13 years ago, this June, that Phil invited me to Paris. And that time went fast, and the presentation space has really changed since then in some ways. But then in other ways, we still have a battle, on our hands to get away from really boring and dull, lifeless presentations. So we all know that presentation is very important, but of course we have this problem. So this is actually a friend of ours sent this one in, a medical conference in UK. This is kind of a typical presentation here in Japan. So as I always say, we must embrace my master, Master Yoda. And we have learned a lot of bad habits over the years. So let's all say this together. You can keep your microphone off, but let's all say it together in English. You must unlearn what you have learned. Yes, that's true. So if you have a colleague, or maybe it's your boss, who has learned the old way of putting a title and 6 or 7 bullet points, then this is for him. So people always ask me, why do Japanese business people sleep on the trains every night? It's because of PowerPoint all day long. You see it everywhere if you ever visit Japan. So for today, for this 30 minutes or so, I make a promise. I'm going through many things relatively fast. I don't know if anything is really new for you, because you guys are all enthusiasts for presentations, but I do promise that hopefully, no, not hopefully, I promise that you will learn, or at least be inspired to take one thing away, and to take that item, take that element, and improve your presentations today. So I don't know if you know Professor Patrick Winston. I was a big fan of his, and he has a really famous talk on YouTube. And so I put the QR code there if you're interested, or just Google Professor Patrick Winston on YouTube. And his presentation is over an hour long, and it's very popular, even though his style was very, he's a tech guy. He's very smart, very professorial. But the reason I'm pointing out him is because, I'm just a design guy. I'm just an old Apple guy or a designer. So I think it has more credibility when it comes from someone who's from more the technical side. So one thing he said, for example, talking to a group of MIT students, technical people, future doctors, and so on, your success, he said, in life will be determined largely by your ability to speak, your ability to write, and the quality of your ideas, in that order. And that might be surprising coming from an MIT professor. But all he's saying, of course, is that, of course, content and ideas are crucial, but you have to be able to communicate those ideas. So this is a book that many of you are familiar with, Brain Rules. Dr. Medina says the same thing: toss away our presentations, and the reason is they look like this, and this leads to this, and we don't want to do that. Here's another slide that or photo that a fan, I guess, in Japan sent in. So this is Dr. Medina's book, and from that there's a couple of takeaways where he says the brain doesn't pay attention to boring things, and he says I'm as bored with presentations as you are. And the other one is very important, is that vision is our most powerful sense, and we should take advantage of that, whether we're presenting online or in the classroom or in the boardroom and so on. So I have a question for you, and Andrea, if you want to pipe in, or anybody, but when was your first multimedia presentation with slides? It could be PowerPoint, or anyone do slides before PowerPoint?
No, for me, it was with PowerPoint, and it was at university.
Okay. Has anyone ever presented with slides before PowerPoint was invented?
Oh Lord, I remember doing a presentation at school many years ago with an overhead projector and acetates.
Ah, yes,
Yes,
yes, the
I'm
old
that old.
yes, the old we call in Japan we call it OHP.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's right. That's like well, I remember that from the 70s. But even before that, you could do slides, but they were 35 millimeter slides. So I used film to take the photos. It was an environmental presentation, and then these were the slides that I used. So this might be, what's natsukashi in Japanese? What do you say? Reminiscent, nostalgic, I guess, for a lot of you. These kinds of slides, and that was me given giving my presentation 17 years old. But the thing is, the quality of the visuals in those days really are just as good as now. I mean, the screen was wonderful, but of course it took a long time and a lot of money to to prepare the slides, which would look something like this. But if you did a presentation on air pollution, too often today, the slides look like this. And so we know, of course, this audience, I'm preaching to the converted, but still there's a lot of people who think, this is what serious people do. They put a lot of text to bore the audience. But anyway, this was my first experience giving presentations with a slide deck. So I used to work for Apple in between stints in Japan. And at that time, I had to give many presentations. And of course, I was inspired by the way Steve presented to small audiences inside the company where he didn't use slides at all. In that case, just pull up a stool and talk to people. But when it was on stage or for larger groups, of course, he was a master. And there are many lessons from Steve Jobs, like make it big, which I will repeat later on, comparing things. So whenever you can compare, Edward Tufte talks about this when using visual displays of quantitative information. So, always here's the data, but what does it mean compared to what? So even visually, you can compare things before, after, big, small, and so on. So Steve was a master at that. And of course, just make sure the elements are big. So that's a fine way to do it. So do you remember, actually, I've seen Phil, I think, talk about this presentation. This should be probably pretty famous to a lot of you. This was when Steve introduced the iPhone. And the reason I'm showing you this, I'll just stop it here, is because this slide, of course, is very simple, this graph. But without it, I mean, this he hadn't even shown the iPhone yet, and still this made the audience applaud. Like, yeah, like well, you haven't even seen it. But it's just it illustrates that if you use even very simple visuals, it can really make things clear for the audience. So that's just a good example. So what is presentation Zen? Sometimes people have a misunderstanding about that. So of course, it's based on the fundamental assumption that vision is our most powerful sense. So this isn't it, and this isn't it, but it doesn't mean that you have to use slides necessarily. You might be at a conference on stage, but that means get front and center, connect with the audience. It could be whiteboards or flip charts, or using slides in a boardroom, or using the screens now that are so ubiquitous all over the place, or it could even be a tablet, you and a tablet connecting to someone. But what we want to avoid, of course, is the death by PowerPoint. So that's why many years ago I wrote the first edition of this book. And I don't know if you noticed, but there were these rocks, river rocks actually, in the front, which aren't really Zen, but that's kind of why I put them in there, balanced. But this is where I grew up on. This is the front yard of our house. And you notice we have these river rocks piled up. And I think that must have been in my psyche. And of course, the next country is Japan, right? Tonari no kuni wa Nihon desu. So it's just right over there. So I think that's why I'm kind of a nerd, or what's called otaku, for Japan, in Japan. But there are many lessons. For example, sado, or tea ceremony, ikebana, and sumie. And you might wonder, well, what do these have in common with things we use in presentations, such as photography and charts and graphs and videos? And the thing that they have in common is the idea of simplicity. It's hard to do tea ceremony or sumie. Very difficult for the creator. It takes lots of study and lots of effort. But for the audience, it's going to be easy. So that's everything we're doing, is trying to make things easy and understandable for the audience. So there are things we can learn from Japan, and there's an idea called onkojishin, which means we can apply some of the lessons from hundreds of years ago to today's problems. And this is something Steve, and I remember even at Apple one time, he had talked about this and how moved he was and inspired by Japan. And as he says in his one of his biographies, that it's directly related to Zen and the Zen arts. So Kamishibai is one of the arts that I'm a big fan of. So you have a storyteller like this, you have the visuals. Now, the visuals aren't really huge, but the elements inside the slide are large. And that's the takeaway. Make things big enough for the audience to see. So this is visual. This would be ridiculous, of course. No one would want to listen to a story like this. So we make the elements inside the slide very large. So I think of this approach as you. So you are very important. You're an extremely important part of that presentation. You plus the visuals together add up to something greater than just two. So this would be presentations and for doctors, but this obviously would not. So I think a lot of you have probably read this book before. It's probably 20 years old now, Multimedia Learning. But there is some evidence where they talk about cognitive load theory and all this kind of stuff that essentially, just simplifying it, that narration, our narration plus visuals is better than no visuals, and it's better than narration and visuals and lots of text. So some text, of course, is useful, but as much as possible, we want to remove that. So this is kind of my mantra, you plus the visual together, kind of like a kamishibai artist. So today I have three parts. This is how I've sort of organized it. So restraint and simplicity and naturalness. So it's restraint and preparation. Simplicity is our keyword for design, and naturalness or conversational in terms of delivery. So let's look at restraint first. And what I have here, as you can see, by the way, I'm not using a green screen. I have a green screen over there, but I didn't have time to set it up. But anyway, this works okay with So if you think about your talk, what that says at the top, toku, that's your presentation, 10 minutes or so. But of course, you're spending a lot of time researching and organizing and editing and designing and then practicing. So the really good presenters, of course, Steve Jobs, you probably read this, but and those keynotes were very important, millions of dollars of free advertising. So those started being worked on months ahead of time. So yeah, you practice is necessary. So something like an iceberg, obviously that 10 minutes took a lot of work to prepare. So what I always say is turn off the computer though, go analog in the beginning when you're really thinking about what's important and what's not as you want to get organized. And one of my favorite TED speakers years ago was Dr. Hans Rosling, which I'm sure many of you know him. Unfortunately, he passed away several years ago now, but he was great at also doing analog style, and that's how he would prepare his visuals. Sometimes he used slides, but he used many different kinds of visuals, but he understood that the importance of really visual quantitative displays and using other kinds of visuals such as models and so on. So planning analog, however you want to do it, sticky notes or notebook papers, however you want to do it. But this is really a time when we can focus on what we need and what we don't. So the famous Kurosawa is famously said, as a filmmaker, you don't need what you don't need. And you end up cutting a lot of stuff that really doesn't serve the story directly. So since we're talking about the preparation stage, this is a time when I could mention something about structure, at least very simple structure. Your presentation, just like a good movie, like Billy Wilder said, you're not aware of the structure unless you're really into movies and you're looking for that. But that movie does have a very important structure underneath it. Otherwise, it all falls down. And it could be the simplest of structures, such as this, which you're all very familiar with, of course. We have the intro, body, conclusion. A lot of presentations follow this simple formula of here's a problem, and here are some ideas for that problem. So this could be the brainstorming, and then you identify the intro. How can I really capture their attention? And then bring them in to the problem and convince them that, yeah, this really is a problem. And here are some solutions that we've tried that didn't work, but here's a new one that we think will work. And then conclusion is usually something like, it could be a pitch if it's a business idea to venture capital, or it could be the next step, like let's have a meeting or come to my website or buy my book or whatever it is. But you want to have a very clear sort of next step in that conclusion, the call to action, in other words. Okay, so that's restraint. That's the first one. Should I pause here and then check how everybody's doing? And this is a chance for me to have a lovely beverage. Andre, is everything okay?
Yeah, all good. Take your time to drink your Japanese tea or Japanese water, whatever you prefer.
Omizu.
And by the way, in the meantime, for everybody, remember, during this presentation, if you have any comments, questions, insights, reflections, anything you'd like to share, please type in the chat, and then I'm going to take everything in the end and ask Garr directly.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So that was restraint. Next thing is simplicity. So I still do, I will be in a few days, take the Shinkansen to Tokyo, the bullet train, maybe for under that name. And one of the great things about being on the bullet train is the Japanese bento. So this is what it looks like. And I always say it's a really good metaphor for a good presentation because visually it's very attractive. It brings you in, it's well organized. The contents are visually appealing, but also the contents are really good for you. And except for the little plastic green leaf, everything is very necessary and edible. So it's a really good sort of a metaphor. The three principles, the visual principles especially, are simplicity, of course, but also clarity and the idea, kind of like Marie Kondo, no clutter, clutter-free visually as much as you can, and also clutter-free in terms of your thinking as well. So going back to quote Dr. Winston, who's speaking to scientists and other technical people, as he said as well, keep your slides simple as possible. But I don't know if Einstein actually said this, but he allegedly said that as simple as possible, but no simpler than that. So you have to decide, of course, how simple in the service of the audience, how can you make things more or easier to understand? So there's a Japanese idea called kanso, which essentially means to eliminate what we don't need. Sort of like Kurosawa said, we don't need what we don't need. But it takes courage because a lot of people will say, well, just in case, let's throw that in there as well. So it takes courage to cut things out, but we do that in the service of the audience. So this is Dr. Kawana said in the kanso concept, the simplicity concept, visual elegance is achieved by the elimination and omission. So always ask yourself, not just for presentation design, but design in general, or even maybe a healthy lifestyle. What can you eliminate? What can you omit to simplify things? And it was, as we said before, make it large, make things easy to see, because you're often in a situation like this, where it might look great for you on your 13-inch MacBook Air, and it might look good in the front row, but you have to remember you're speaking often for large audiences. So we want to make the slides big. What that says, the woman is saying, I can't see the slides. The other thing is a lot of presentations, perhaps including this one, are recorded and people watch them on their smartphone. So they could be watching these presentations live or recorded on very small screens, good screens, but very small screens. So it's really important to make the elements large. So how large? I just very quickly put this together. People, I think a lot of people, if you said even, well, put like over 100-point font, people go, what? That sounds huge. But that's not very big at all. A lot of times my fonts will be 500, 600. I mean, certainly over 100 is not very big, as you can see, but it's just a way of thinking. People will say, well, 60, that sounds crazy, right? That's so huge, but it's not big at all. So don't be afraid to make it big, make it easy for the audience to see. The next concept, very related to the idea of simplicity, is signal versus noise. We want the signal up, the noise down as much as we can. So related to that is the idea I talked about before of removing the clutter. So let's look at some examples. If you look at this slide, this is not complicated. It's very simple. Well, it's noisy though, right? If we talk about signal versus noise, even though it's a very easy idea. So this is before and then after. And you could say that the hand and the globe there is noise. I think that qualifies as noise, but noise is not always bad. It's an emotional element that's relevant. But yes, it would be, strictly speaking, simpler without that. But again, that's your call to add some interest or some emotion, even to a quantitative display. Here's another one before and then after. So we could do it like that, on stage, or if it's a presentation, we could even be inside the slide if we're presenting online. These are examples of before, after of removing the noise like this. All right. The next thing is under simplicity is the picture superiority effect. So we know that, I don't know about you, but usually I love reading. I read all the time. We all love reading, but generally when we see a screen and we see someone talking, we're not really interested in doing a lot of reading, but we can look at a visual and the person speaking at the same time. So I have a question for you to think about. What does a good visual message have to do? Could be a poster, a sign on the highway or the freeway, or anything, right? So for example, in this one, this is near a station in where we live. This is an advertisement for a sports club. So if you look at that, what does that have to do? What do the visual elements do? You think of like, what's the first thing it has to do? Well, the first thing, of course, is it has to get your attention. If you don't notice it, or if it isn't interesting for your brain, in the case of a presentation, people are not going to be engaged with it. It should help understanding, it should help the audience understand, and 3, help them remember, help them recall it later on. And then usually there's some sort of action to take. So for example, and I've showed this one, actually I showed this one in the latest edition of my book. This is very common, right? So rice consumption in Japan going down, but it's not visual at all. And I've showed this to students and asked them to think about it. 2 days later, I asked them about this again. No one remembers the data. But how would you redesign this if you had to? And there isn't just one answer. There are many kinds of ways that you could do it. So for example, you could do over 2 slides. Here's 1962 and then 2016. And if your slides on a stage, this could be animation with a dissolve, for example. With a cross dissolve, this looks really smooth. But I'm just using without, that's the name of the app, without any animation in it. So that's one idea. Or you could do something like this. Maybe it's more storytelling. So you start 1962. This is my wife's family back in 1960, literally 1962. That's when the photo was taken. And in those days, people ate 5.4 bowls of rice. So a lot more rice than, say, today's Japan, where it's much less. So you could do something like that. Or it just depends. There's my father-in-law. Again, maybe this time the subject is a little bit different. The date is the same, but now we're talking about metabolic syndrome. Is that how you say in English? Metabolic syndrome? Metabolic, it's Japanese, I think. But metabolic syndrome, like, pre-diabetic kind of thing, which is a problem in many places. So let's say here's my father-in-law, but back in those days, diabetes was very low. People were quite fit. They ate a lot of rice. Things have changed. So we see a businessman, high stress, and so on. So the topic was a little different. The data is the same, but it depends on really what you're talking about. Are you talking about metabolic syndrome, or is it something like this where just the diet has changed because of increase of bread, for example? Bread makes you hungry, so you eat more bread and so on. So it just depends. Or you could just show the data and spend more time with that and then talk about that. So however you do it, we can all agree, I think, that the after is better than the before slide. And there are myriad ways you can do that, but we try to make it easy. So this is what I was talking about. One of my classes had the slide on the left. Nobody remembered the data. Classes where I showed the 2 slides on the right, everyone could recall it. It's like, God, that's easy, right? They remember it, even though I didn't even ask them to remember it. So it's really sticky, kind of like the rice. And as I said before, how Steve Jobs did it, so comparing things like then and now, or comparing maps side by side, then and now, the brain loves that. The brain loves before, after. We're really attracted to that. Again, you plus the visuals is something even greater than the sum of the parts. Okay, so that's simplicity. And the last thing is naturalness in delivery. So quoting the famous Aristotle, what's that? Aristotle chestnut, we're all familiar with this. And the idea is that we need logic, and we need emotion, of course, and we need ethos, or etosu is your character. So we need all of these things. Well, there we are. So we need all, I can move that around. So you have your logos, you have your emotion, and then you have you too. So I think a lot of people, I don't know how it is in your field, if you're in the medical field, for example, or depending on what country you're in, but in Japan, people put a lot of work into this. The facts, of course, must be correct. So the logic is there, but we often fail with the emotional connection, and then we kind of hide behind slides. And in this case, we need the person, the presenter matters too. I believe that the character of the person matters. So it's not just the data, but otherwise, why have a presentation? We could just read the report. So I think the presenter does matter. So Dr. Winston said, when talking about delivery, to start with a promise. He said, don't start with an agenda, but actually, like, here's what you're going to learn today, or you're going to do, I promise you, this kind of thing. So that was really a good tip. Dr. Winston also says, stand close to the screen. I was really happy to hear him say that. I've said that ever since I was, I don't know, in high school. I thought the idea of the screen and the presenter is like kamishibai, or like the TV news, right? We all grew up with that. with Walter Cronkite or wherever you're from. You had the BBC or whatever. You have a TV presenter, you have the visuals, and we can look at those things together, right? So stand close to the screen, something like this, however you do it, even if it's a larger screen. People can look at you and the screen at the same time if you're close. Again, this is coming from Dr. Winston, more from the technical side, but even though he was talking about very technical presentations, he still said you need to show the passion for your topic. Keep it short, of course. How are we doing for that? Always as short as possible. You're familiar with Dr. Medina's 10-minute rule. I think it's even less, become less than that. But, change the pace, show a video if you're in a real space with actual humans where face to face, where it's a little bit easier. He said, I've always said this, and laser pointers they have their place, but he recommended not using them. And instead, pre-plan that I know I'm going to put an arrow here, or I can put a circle here or something like that. They may have their place, but generally speaking, I've seen them abused quite a bit. So remember that your feelings are contagious. What you feel, the audience is going to feel. You've heard this one before, the old mirror neurons, right? So I always tell this story. I told it before, but it's really true. When I was in Copenhagen a few years ago, and I was at this very place, under this roller coaster here. And I didn't know anybody, but I just sat down on the bench under the roller coaster. And I felt good because all these people were on the roller coaster screaming and laughing. And then people started to gather sitting next to me. We're all just laughing and feeling good because complete strangers were feeling good. So we were feeling that. So think about how you can add that to your presentation too. If you're feeling like you don't want to be there and you're resentful, the audience is going to feel that as well. But they're also going to feel that if you really care, even if you're a little bit nervous, but if they feel that you really care and that you've really made an effort, then that's going to go a long way. These are the 7 P's of delivery. I think I put more than that in my Naked book, but the idea of complete presence, get close to the audience, proximity, change the pace, as I said earlier, show your passion, as Dr. Winston said as well. If you can put any level of playfulness in your presentation, that's always appreciated. And then, of course, we want to use our power of persuasion through our voice, but in our character, but also, of course, through the data. And then as much as you can, you want to get the audience to participate, which I admit before doing Zoom calls and online meetings, which I think are great, and you can do it with that. But I grew up in the different space as a musician, and I just love, I can do a lot of things live in a room that are not as easy, at least for me to do, but I'd love to hear about your ideas about that. Okay, so restraint in preparation, simplicity in design, and a naturalness in delivery. And so I think it's time, if there are any questions or comments, I would love to hear them.
Yep, Garr, thank you so much. That was great. We do have a few questions. Before we go through the questions, just out of curiosity, this is a question to everybody. Garr at the beginning made a promise. He said, I promise you are going to learn at least one thing, one tip. So I'm curious, what's the one thing you are taking away from Garr's presentation? I'll give you a few seconds for you to think about it. And then please type in the chat. Let us know in the chat, what's the one key thing? It could be an idea, an insight, a reflection. It could be something that you knew already, but it was a good refresher. For example, Pascal, you can't read and listen at the same time. Molly, simplicity. Also, David, Janet as well. David, less is more. And Nicola says, close the screen. I guess like planning analog. Yeah. Louise, express the objective as one tip rather than a boring agenda slide. Yeah. Carry large visual comparisons. Yeah. And yeah, Felix, font size, less is more, eliminating the unnecessary, Helen. Yeah. Be present to everybody. Using many slides, Miranda. Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you for that. Now, Garr, I do have a few questions. One is from Martin. Martin asks, the idea of making it big I think it's something that you've covered, but perhaps it's an opportunity to mention it again, to clarify for everybody. You said to keep it big, the text, make it big. Does that apply to online presentations as well, where everybody is also maybe viewing the presentation from a screen?
Yeah, I think so, especially so because a lot of people are also online, using this, or they're watching the recording later. So I think even more so, it's changed how movies. I mean, people have to think about. I mean, movies. A lot of movies, even old movies, still play well because they knew it, even though it was for the big screen. If you're going to put it on the screen, it has to be able to be seen somehow. It might be even small, but at least it has to be legible, or the contrast has to be strong enough so that it's easy to see. But the old ways of doing things, where it's just a deck of slides, very small text, is just is not very engaging in any format, but especially when it's on a phone.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And in the meantime, I'm also hoping another one last minute question here. There's another one from Dirk. Dirk says, do you really need to indicate the data source on a slide during the presentation?
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be large, but my feeling is, yeah, definitely has to be there. I mean, even if it's not really legible unless you really look at it, because on a screen, like online, it might be hard to see. But yeah, absolutely, you have to put that there. That's one of the things that college students, because they'll have data that, and I'm incredulous about it, like a COVID data point or something. I go, where did you get that? And they'll say internet. So what? You can't say that. So it's very important, the source of things, extremely important. So yes, you don't have to make it huge, and you don't want to hide it. And I wouldn't put the URL for something. Like it could be U.S. News and World Report, blah blah blah, the huge URL. No, don't put that. Just put U.S. News and World Report and the date or something.
Okay,
It
great.
could be United Nations, 1983 or something like that. But yeah, you got to put the source for sure.
The internet is not enough. Now, Gordon asks, just as a matter of personal interest, how many slides did you use? He's asking because Gordon is also, he does similar things. He's also into communication, and he would like to use that as an example in his own training courses. How many slides? I don't know if you know, Garr, but for this
Yeah, I can see them. So they're right down below me, and I have others. I mean, for example, this one that is on, and this is an alpha channel, up above it. What I always say is that the number of slides doesn't matter. Just like you don't go to Star Wars and then ask, well, how many scenes did they have, right? Or how many frames per second was that? But there's still, I mean, 1,000 slides might be too many. But I mean, the way I use them often, they're very visual, just coming through. This particular case, for example, now 107 slide 171. But if you say that to people like, hello, everyone, I have a 200 slide deck that I'd like to get. What are you talking about? So you don't talk about it that way. But if you watch the news, like the BBC, 22 minutes or how often, or how, I don't know how long it is. In the States, it's usually 22 minutes of news in that 30-minute period. There are hundreds of slides. If you count like a piece of text, that's a slide, a data, an interview for 30 seconds. So these are all like slides, if you will. Slides are just a place where we hold our visual. So you definitely see, I don't know, hundreds, certainly over 200 different elements that are coming in on CNN or BBC. So it's kind of natural to us. So I think it's good to have a break in there as well.
Yeah.
That's what I recommend for people doing slides, is that, especially if it's very visual, is that sometimes the slide just goes to blank, just black, so that then all the attention is back on you. The attention should be on the slides and you, but there are times when you want to get away from the visual or the slide, walk around or something, and you can just make it go black.
Yeah, perfect. And many other questions are coming in. So let me pick this one from, perhaps just for interest. Suparna is asking, I love your black background. What is it? Is it a darkened room, or are you using anything behind you?
No, it's just kind of a metaphor for my black heart, despair. Yeah, let me do something. I recommend this, by the way. So so I'm using a good camera over here. It's a difference between using a full frame mirrorless camera, and now I'll go to Logitech, like a Brio, which says 4K, but there's more obviously than that. So that let me turn that camera. Okay, there's that. So and I have the ISO is up way too high for this, but because I have a lot of lights, but that's what it is. And you can buy these on Amazon. This is a green one over here. So they kind of pop open. They become small. They become about this big. You can fold them up. But what's great about them is they're very taut. Is that how you say it? Taut? How do you say that in British English? The real English. So there's no wrinkles in them. So they're great. I don't know how much they are, but they're not that expensive. And if you need them to be portable, I'm never going to do that. But you can fold it back and just take it with you. They're, I think, 180 centimeters tall by almost 180 wide. They're really good. But you can see if you have a crappy camera, it doesn't look so good. But with a decent camera with a crop on it, it's okay.
Perfect.
Big difference.
There's a question from Miranda. She says, I noticed that your slides were not particularly branded. And what are your thoughts on how to make slides interesting when you have to, I guess what she means is when you, for example, when you need to follow a certain corporate template, for example.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm in a unique situation because I don't have a corporate template. So, for example, that's not my template, but that's my background. If I just use text, so my, style for this one would be something like this, but I'd also had slides that were like this. So, so you do have to follow that template, of course. But you can do full screen visuals. You could make there are many things such as making the graphics, the charts and graphs much larger and easier to see. When I was at Apple, they gave us, of course, they made the decks for like the systems engineers that I work with too. So pre-made. And the really good ones, they hated them. So they changed. This is Apple, but still they weren't as bad as, most people, but still they were too wordy and the bar graphs were too small. So a couple of good engineers I knew who were really into presentation, they looked up to Steve Jobs and all this stuff. So they just edited them. They stuck with the Apple template, but they also skirted the rules. If I think if the marketing department really knew what they were doing, but they stuck with the Apple rules, but they just made things really bigger and simpler. Basically, they eliminated things they didn't need to make it simple, and they made other elements bigger because they felt that was better for the audience.
The takeaway for us is that it's still possible. It is true that sometimes we have corporate templates that enforce bad design, but there is still something that we can do to overcome bad corporate templates. There's another question, Gar, from Eleni. She's asking, what do you think about presenting without slides?
Yes, so yeah, that's great. And that's why I mentioned what is presentations then. It could be someone who's a really good storyteller and they're good at, at spinning, what's the word? Not spinning, but at creating a visual world with their words. And some people are really good at that. Stand-up comedians, for example, are really good at that. It's a great talent. I have a lot of respect for the old comedians or someone, actors. I don't know personally, but I've seen Tom Hanks, for example, ad lib when things went wrong. And he just has that ability to engage an audience. So absolutely, if that's your talent, you absolutely don't need slides. Visuals really help, but you could also use more physical prop. I think prop comes from property, right? The property of Hollywood studio. So whatever the thing is, this is a prop. So visual audiences like visual things, whiteboards and drawing. I think mainly in the company, we used whiteboards to sketch out ideas. So you should be as visual as you can, but that sometimes means that if you're really good at that, you can paint those visuals with your words as well.
Yeah. There's a very interesting question here, Gar, from Nicola. She asks, are there any Zen tips when it comes to overcoming public speaking nerves and anxiety?
Well, I wouldn't say that you have to start Zazen or meditation. That takes time. But there's one thing, and what's his name? Huberman? Is it Huberman? Anyway, a doctor who's kind of blew up recently on the internet. He's at Stanford University in the States. Sort of another brain specialist, but really, really good. But there's something called the physiological sigh, for example, and this has worked for me, where you take, I can do it now. You can Google it if you want. Physiological sigh. If you ever notice your dog watching TV, laying on the floor, sleeping, where the dog kind of goes, right? And we all do that when we get nervous. So what you do is you take 2 inhales with your nose. You should always breathe through your nose if you can. And then a really slow exhale. I mean, but really like try to get all that CO2 out. So it goes like this. And then again, and then out. Really, as much as a bit unnatural, you really get that air out of your lungs. And you can do that twice, maybe even 3 times, but really no more than that. And it really does work. I mean, it's worked for me. I've been in some, I don't like crowded trains. And as I've gotten older, my panic disorder has gotten worse. Thankfully, stage fright hasn't hit me, but I got other frights like packed trains and elevators. But I can empathize. If you have stage fright, it's crippling. And whatever your fear is, I mean, a lot of people have panic disorders, but even just stage fright is something you have to deal with. But I think what Dr. Huberman says is don't use like a mental process to solve this mental problem, this mental condition. Instead, there are physical things you can do. So diet, obviously, don't have caffeine that morning, which is hard because I love coffee. But physical things like going out and running the morning before or whatever. But try that physiological sigh. It really, it really does work.
Yeah, breathing is super powerful. Avoiding caffeine. Now, I'm like you, Gar. I love coffee, and I know I shouldn't do it, but this morning I couldn't resist. It was an early morning for me, so I had my cup of coffee. There's another question from Joe. Joe is asking, what ratio of preparation time to presentation time do you generally put in?
Yeah, I don't have a formula, and I know people want formulas, and my answer wouldn't be good anyway because I'm very inefficient. So, right, I'm sure way too much time. That's the answer to everything. So Chat GPT has really helped me with some things, like writing speeches that I have to give, and it's very useful for that. Help as a helper. There's no formula. I guess you could Google it and find it, but a lot of time. I know that I read one years ago. If anyone knows what it was, like 1 minute is 1 hour. Like 1 minute of presentation time is 1 hour of prep. But that just depends. Do you know the subject already? So if you're already someone, I know the subject. In fact, I know it too well. How do I condense my big ideas into 10 minutes? That's different from someone who, like a student who has to research it first, or even a business person. I got to research it. So how long? That's part of the equation too. I've got to really know what I'm going to say. But anyway, that's one rule of thumb that I have heard: 1 minute of presentation time, 1 hour of preparation. But that doesn't seem long enough. If I was 1 minute on the TED stage, if that's all they gave me, I would prepare a lot more than 1 hour for that.
Yeah, a lot of preparation. And so we've got time for perhaps a couple of other questions, and then we do need to close. Peter is asking about sound quality. He says, of course, sound quality is important, but both of you, so he's talking about you, Gar, and me, have a big microphone. Perhaps is there a smaller, more elegant, out of the view option? I don't know. Maybe I don't know about you, Gar. We also have Gordon, who's an expert here. Like, yeah, I know it's big. It works. The audio is good, but it's big.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a studio. This is the Shure that's common. I mean, Joe Rogan uses, it's an industry standard. You can pay more than this one, but it's really good for the money. And you get that just a better quality sound for doing narration and things. But if you want like a lavalier mic, you can do that. There's one. Do you have a second? I just go behind this wall because I'll show you this one that they recommend. It's only about $150. It comes with, it's wireless. It'll attach to your phone. You can even attach it to your smartphone. And yeah, it's quite good. So I'll be right back.
Yeah. And in the meantime, just to anticipate, we're going to close with potentially 2 questions. There's one from Martin, which is about body language. It's something that Gar hasn't discussed yet. I think it's back. Yep.
Okay. So there's this one. Who makes this? Okay, this is it. I gotta put it up here.
We can see it.
After I gotta get out of the way. There we go. What is it? Do you know this one?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, and it comes. What is the name of it? Hollyland. Hollyland. So that's the, it comes with a receiver. Sorry, I put receiver, and then it comes with 2 microphones that can just clip on. And it's wireless. And that's about $150 US, I think. So it's quite good.
Okay. Great.
And
Thanks
you
for
could
that.
do a podcast with that.
Yeah. And Garr, let's close with one question. So there are a few others, but sorry, we don't have time to cover everything. There's a question from Martin about body language. So he's talking about body language should also support your presentation. Do you have any tips from that perspective?
Well, it's kind of hard here. I mean, what are the common mistakes? I mean, people who pace, movement is good, but moving too much is just nervous energy. It's like a tiger going back and forth in a cage. So purposeful movement to take up a space. People, when they get really nervous, and by the way, people don't know you're nervous. So don't say you're nervous because they actually don't know. But if you tell them I'm so nervous, then they're going to feel nervous. But if you take up space, practice doing this where you don't stand in one place, but they say take space, walk around just a little bit using your hands. That means you're confident. I'm here. I don't want to make it sound like a macho thing, but it's like, I'm confident to be here. So there's something about space. When we're afraid or we're fearful, we kind of close up. So someone who's open, it feels more confident. So that sends a subliminal message of confidence, and that makes the audience feel better as well.
Yeah.
What are
yeah,
some
hand
other
gestures? Hand gestures are effective. The more we move our hands, the more dynamic we are as presenters. I agree. Yeah. Okay, right. Garr, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your insights. We've got 5 minutes before we close, so I've got a few things for everybody to check out.
Bye-bye.
One is we've got a cat as well.
Sorry.
I mean,
What's going on?
that's great. So, Ron, if you don't mind, can you please include the final links as well? So you'll see a few links in the chat now. One is for a virtual goodie bag. As I promised at the beginning, our supporting partners have been very kind to put together a collection of free resources, discounts, promotions. So it's the first link here in the chat. Check it out, the virtual goodie bag. The other thing is the Confident Presenter Scorecard. Some of you have completed it already. I've seen it. For those of you who haven't, check it out. It's a way for you to very quickly assess your current presentation skills. It takes less than 3 minutes. It's free. You just need to answer a few simple questions, and then you'll get a score. That tool will tell you what that score means for you, and it also identifies opportunities for improvement. So check it out. Also, there's a link to my web class. Now, if you're interested in these ideas, presentation skills in general, if you've never attended my own web class, it's something that I run every 2 weeks, how to avoid confusing your audience, even if you're not a natural presenter. The link is there, and we've got 2 dates coming up in the next few weeks. Feel free to check out the link. Feel free to choose the date and time that works best for you. These are free sessions, very short, less than an hour, 45 minutes on all things presentation skills. So I hope to see you there. And just one more thing, if you are seriously motivated to take your presentation skills to a higher level, then I would be happy to offer a complimentary free consultation, a 1-hour consultation to see, for both of us, to see if there might be a fit between what you may be looking for and what we have to offer. Now, the consultation is not for everybody. This is only for established business owners, business leaders who want to become more confident presenters, either for themselves or maybe because you have a team, colleagues, and you want to develop a team of confident communicators. So if that's the case, then it would be a good fit. And regardless of whether or not there's a good fit, I can promise you that if you attend the consultation, you walk away with much greater clarity on how you can become a more confident presenter. Again, either for you or for your colleagues, for your teams. And you'll also walk away with a free copy of Phil Wakenell's book, Business Presentation Revolution. Phil, a colleague of mine at Ideas on Stage. Of course, I'm biased, but I do think that it's a fantastic book. So just for agreeing to have a chat, I'll send you a free copy, Business Presentation Revolution. If you are interested, just type yes in the chat. Now, I see a lot of private messages already. Up to you. You can type yes privately. You can type yes in the public chat, as you prefer, no difference. Just to clarify though, if you are typing yes, you are not committing to anything. You're just telling me that you would like to learn a little bit more about what the consultation is about. And so what I'll do then, I'll get in touch. I'll give you more information about the consultation. And if together we decide that it makes sense, then we'll go ahead and find a time to speak. And that's it. Now, if there's one thing I would like you to take away from this session, is that if you think about it, any difficulty in your business, roles, or careers can be traced back to a communication deficiency, which means that most likely somewhere there's a bit of a lack of communication skills. For example, if your business is not growing, for sure, somewhere there's a communication deficiency. If you are finding it hard to lead your team, there's a communication deficiency. If you are struggling to make an impact for causes you care about, there's a communication deficiency. Any difficulty in your business, roles, or careers boils down to a communication deficiency. So if you feel that that might be the case in your situation, then you need to be intentional about what you're going to do about it and when. Because you see, many people attend sessions like this, they watch YouTube videos, they listen to podcasts, and then what do? Nothing. They procrastinate. They think that now is not the right time, and so they'll wait for the perfect time. The truth is, there will never be a perfect time. The perfect time to start your journey to becoming the best presenters you can be is now. Mastering the art of public speaking can be rewarding. It is rewarding, but there's no reward without action. Good things don't come, never come to those who wait. So if this speaks to you, here is my invitation to you. Start your journey now. Start your journey to becoming the best presenters you can be today, not tomorrow. Start your journey to becoming the best version of yourselves as communicators today, not tomorrow. And of course, if you do choose to start the journey, that I'd love for you to share with us. Let me know if you're interested. We can get started with the free consultation I mentioned. Feel free to type yes in the chat if you're interested. If you've started that journey already, that's great. Keep going. You won't regret it, and your audience will thank you. And I also want to thank you very much. Garr, thanks again for your time. I know it was dinner time in Japan, so thank you again. Thanks for sharing your insights. Thanks to our supporting partners. Thanks to everybody who joined. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you find it useful. Let's keep in touch. All the very best. Ciao.
Bye-bye.